The Gospel is written in the 14th chapter of St. Matthew, beginning at the 22nd verse. Jesus made his disciples get into the boat and to go on ahead to the other side, to the Sea of Galilee, while he dismissed the crowds. And after he dismissed the crowds, he went up to the mountain by himself to pray. When evening came, he was there alone. But by the time the boat, battered by the waves, was far from land, for the wind was against them. And early in the morning he came walking toward them on the sea. And when the disciples saw him walking on the sea, they were terrified, and they said, "It's a ghost." And they cried out in fear. But immediately Jesus spoke to them and said, "Take heart, it is I. Do not be afraid." Peter answered him, "Lord, if it is you, command me to come to you on the water." He said, "Come." So Peter got out of the boat, started walking on the water, and came toward Jesus. But when he noticed the strong wind, he became frightened and beginning to sink, cried out, "Lord, save me." Jesus immediately reached out his hand and caught him, saying to him, "O you of little faith, why did you doubt?" When they got into the boat, the wind ceased. And those in the boat worshipped him, saying, "Truly, you are the Son of God." Here ends the gospel for the day. Please be seated. The story of Jesus walking on the water is one of those signature episodes of Jesus used usually to prove that there was something supernatural about him. There are some people that regard this story as merely parabolic and really don't believe, kind of like Peter said, "Well, if it is you, Lord, ask me to come and walk on water." But those of us who believe, it's not hard to believe Jesus walked on water. If he rose from the dead, it seems kind of inconsequential beside that. But it is an unusual story. And what significance can we find in it? Jesus had just fed the 5,000. And people were crowding in on him, and he was feeling stressed because everybody wanted something from him. They'd seen the miracles. They wanted to be healed. They wanted something extraordinary to happen. And then also, it is recorded that at this point, Jesus also had been informed that John the Baptist had been killed by Herod. This was his forerunner, the one who prophesied his coming, the one who baptized him, and it also happened to be a relative. John the Baptist was dead. And maybe Jesus was scared too. And so our text this morning said Jesus ordered the disciples to get into the boat and let's get out of here. They obviously went to another place where Jesus was led off and left to himself to pray, to meditate, to rethink what his purpose was, and to deal with the death of John the Baptist, his cousin. What does this story have to say to us? I think the first thing it says, a great deal of our quality of life depends how we respond to the storms in life. And the storms are going to be constant. They're going to come time and time again. As I was watching the morning news again this week, those meteorologists are telling us how many hurricanes we're going to have. It's going to be the worst hurricane season of all time, they say. And of course, we have to believe them because, after all, they are scientists and they know how many storms we're going to get. 25, they say, conservatively. But storms come in life. And it seems that just when we get done with one storm, another one comes. And the quality of life, to a great deal, depends upon how we're going to react to the storm. It is interesting when we talk about dealing with storms or dealing with fear, and all our texts this morning that we read deal with fear. People deal with fear in very odd ways. In 2004, we had one of the worst tsunamis in the history of this world. It hit Indonesia and rocked people 26 miles into the mainland. There's an interesting story that comes out. A man by the name of Lucas, who was a Serbian and who had a place down in Indonesia, was resting at home, and he turned on the television set and he heard the words, at least he thought he heard the words, "A tsunami is coming, take cover and get to safety immediately." He went to the window of his living room and jumped out. It was on the second story. And on the way down, he recognized the fact that he was not in Indonesia, but he was at his home in Serbia. Too late. 2 broken legs and a severed spine. We panic when we hear storms. He wanted to sue the TV station, saying they had made him panic without good reason. He lost the case. King Charles VIII of France became king in 1483. King Charles was paranoid. He thought that someone was out to poison him, and that was not an unreasonable assumption, because that's the way they got rid of rulers in the Middle Ages. Somebody poisoned them. It was convenient. That's why kings, even from the time of David, had tasters who would taste the food that was prepared for kings to make sure that there wasn't something in it that would destroy the king. It was a position that paid well. But he was so paranoid that even though he had the tasters, he ate less and less until in 1498 he died of malnutrition. He starved himself to death. Norman Vincent Peale, the late Norman Vincent Peale, who had a lot of stories to tell about panic and fear, talked about a tennis star who was at the top of her game at the age of 30. There was one overwhelming fear in her life. She had gone with her mother when she was 9 years old to the dentist, and her mother had died in the dentist chair. It had nothing to do with the dentistry. She had a bad heart. But this tennis star resolved never to go to a dentist in her life. And by the time she was 30, she had severe problems that needed immediate attention. She was so afraid that she asked her physician to go with her to the dentist to attend to her. It didn't do any good. She died in a dentist chair of a heart attack. And the story read, 30 years of fear kill that tennis star. Some people are panicking in response to our pandemic, and there are others that are trying to deal with it the best they can, and to come out with new ways of handling things. And sometimes it means just stepping out in faith and making some commitment not to just sit around. And we call it walking on water when we do extraordinary things in very odd situations, very terrifying situations. That phrase is used a lot. If somebody thinks too much of himself, one of the critics will say, well, he thinks he walks on water. Or somebody gets too smart, they'll say, well, if you think you're God, just try walking on water. It's a phrase that's used a lot. But I think it should be a badge of honor to think you can walk on water. Because Peter did. Peter said, well, if you are Jesus, because they were afraid, and they said, and Jesus told them not to be afraid, it is I, you know me. 3 o'clock in the morning, I can understand why they had a few assumptions that it was a ghost. But the reality is, if you're going to walk on water, you got to get out of the boat. Peter was the only one that got out of the boat. And I realize his event of walking on water was very limited, but he did. And it's recorded in history. And now we wonder if this text is really about Peter or about Jesus. And this morning we have to say, no, it's really about us. Are you willing to step out and walk on water? How to overcome fear. Because records are made and problems are solved only by people who have a certain ability to step out in trust, maybe in fear, but mostly in trust, believing that God is there, willing to help them. There's a marvelous movie made called Chariots of Fire. It was about the 1924 Paris Olympics. It centered on two 200-meter runners, Eric Liddell and Harold Abrams. Harold was from England, Eric from Scotland. Abrams was the favorite. But just before the Olympics, they had a qualifying race, and he was beaten by the Scotsman. Harold was so despondent about it that he said, I'm not going to run anymore. He tells that to his girlfriend, Sybil, who seems to have a very good head. He said, I lost. And she said, well, why are you so despondent? Well, I'm so upset that I'm just going to quit. Well, she said, why would you quit? You lost a race. You didn't lose a relative. Nobody died. Why is that so important? He said, I live to race and to run. And she said, and you did magnificently. But Eric Liddell was even more magnificent. And he won that race. The right person won it. And Harold says, well, that's it then. That's it then. I should stop running. And she said, why would you stop running? I guess if you're afraid to lose, maybe that's the best alternative. And Abram says, I didn't come to lose. But if I can't win, I won't run. And Sybil says, if you don't run, you won't win. If you don't run, you won't win. You got to get out of the boat. I don't know if you know the results, but Eric Liddell refused to run because the finals were on Sunday, and he was a clergy. He was a devoted Presbyterian, and he didn't think it was proper to race on Sunday. He backed out of the race, and Abrams did win a medal at the 1924 Paris Olympics because he dared to get out of the boat. I told you when I was in Hawaii, I bought a locksmith business. Didn't know much about it. Still don't. But one of the things I discovered by it is you came into that business thinking, well, if something is locked, you can't get into it. And it's only a little bit into the business that you begin to discover that the reason you're there is to find the fastest way to get in when everybody else thinks you can't. Get out of the boat. 11 apostles became, what do we call them? Boat potatoes? And that's about right, isn't it? In our society today, 1 out of 12 is daring to step out and do something to create community events that will live by the rules but will move people on so they have some kind of contact with each other and they don't feel lost. They won't feel abandoned. It was nice this morning to recognize that there is a group of people that are protesting the elimination of visitors from nursing homes. They said that's a terrible thing to impose upon the older people, that they can't see or touch or speak to their loved ones. And they're finding a way that can happen again. If you're going to walk on water, you got to step out of the boat. And just being here this morning is a testament to the fact that you are willing to do something. When you really want to worship in person and be with each other, you came. And that's a step in the right direction. The third thing I think we get from this text is the attempt to walk on water involve moments of glory marred by moments of failure. Peter is the only one recorded besides Jesus that walked on water. And it was only for a small time. Peter had faith, but once he got out and saw what was happening, he listened to the wind. And he said, I can't be doing this. This isn't within my limits. I'm outside my realm. And he starts to sink. And you might think that's the worst time for Peter, but it's the best time because he reaches out his hand to Jesus and recognizes that your moments of glory are only because of Jesus. And if you think you're totally dependent upon yourself, you're going to sink pretty quick. John Ortberg is a Presbyterian or a Methodist ministry, written a lot of books, including one entitled, If You're Going to Walk on Water, You Got to Get Out of the Boat. That was not my original. I took it from Ortberg. But he said one of the things that happened, he took his son to a seaside resort, and they watched them parasail. And his son wanted to parasail at 10 years old. So they sat down with the instructor, and the instructor said, what do you want to go? How far do you want to go up? I do 400, 600, and 800 feet. Parasailing's exciting. And Ortberg said, let me talk to my son about it a little bit. So they talked about it. And they talked about the dangers and the possibility that he might fall. And this 10-year-old said to his father, I want to go to the 800. He said the trip is only for a little while, but the memory of it will last forever. At 10 years old. Eventually, we'll come down and we'll assume that that person driving the boat knows what he's doing. A great deal of life and your quality of life depends on how you deal with the storms in your life. But the end point of the story is there is going to be a time that you're going to recognize you're beyond your realm. And if you want to continue, you have to reach out for the hand of God. I have hope in this church. We have a lot of people that are willing to deal with what's going on. I think we're dealing with it fine for those who want to be here and those who still have some fears. It's okay. But the message is still the same. There will be storms in our life. If you're going to walk on water, you've got to get out of the boat. And our successes will be short-lived because we'll recognize that we need help. And that's when we reach out for the hand of God. Amen. We will say the statement of faith, the confession of faith, as we receive new members. And at this point, we'll go directly to the offering.